Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jen Zabasaja of Bloomberg Quick Take. Today, I'm really excited about the conversation we're about to have. I'm joined by three really important guests to talk about the current state of America and really to dig a little bit deeper into the issues that are fueling the protests that we're seeing over the death of George Floyd. So let's get right into it. I want to introduce everyone. First, we have Keith Taylor. He's a professor at John Jay College here in New York City. He's also a seasoned law enforcement veteran, formerly in the highest ranks of the New York Department of Correction and the NYPD. We also have Luis Hernandez. He's a community organizer and youth activist. He's been out there on the front lines of the peaceful protest. He works alongside the organization, The Gathering for Justice. And finally, we have Justin Feldman. He's an assistant professor of epidemiology at NYU School of Medicine. Hey, guys, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So let's start things off. Keith, I wanted to start with you. As a former member of the force, I wonder what your reaction has been to the protests over the past few days and really what we've seen since that video of George Floyd's killing came out.
My reaction to the protests is they've been highly appropriate because the nation has had the opportunity to see yet another unjust murder, frankly, of a civilian at the hands of a law enforcement officer. And so the one of the beautiful things about the country is the ability to protest peacefully, and all citizens have the right to exercise that in a safe way. And so I think it's very important that their voices, their outrage, their outcry gets heard by those who have the ability to make a change. The legislators, the elected officials, the heads of police departments across the nation, that there has to be a better way of doing the work of policing.
Yeah. And Luis, you're out there at the protest. You've been out there. And to me, it just seems like these protests feels different. And I wonder if you can just sort of tell us what it's been like on the ground and what the mission of the Gathering of Justice has been as you guys are going out there day after day.
Certainly, I think what we're seeing right now is everyone loosely organizing. We're seeing a very different type of movement, a very different awakening and style of organizing. While it's still real strategy, I think it's different than what we've seen with anything else in the past. Right now, folks are operating under a decentralized lens where there's no clear leader or no central organization that's taking initiative. But yet there's so many people still showing out in the streets. I think last night in New York City, in different protests across the city, there was over 50,000 folks out on the streets. Folks are just deciding they want to show up to the streets to do something because they're just angry at what's going on.
And it's people of all races, too.
Certainly. There's people of all different type of backgrounds and ethnicities. I think some of these protests are some of the most diverse that we've seen in a while. And while that's incredibly important, as a person of color, as an Afro-Latino, I continue to urge folks to show up to the streets, to be allies to their Black siblings. I think as we continue to show up to these streets, we need to both honor, respect, and take the lead of Black women who have been organizing and on the front lines for years on end. And so that's what we're doing here at the Gathering for Justice, as our mission is to continue to build a movement to dismantle the systems that permeate racial injustice, as well as end child incarceration.
And Justin, you've also been out there at some of the protests. I wonder what's it been like for you?
These seem bigger. I think there's a different sense of urgency, a greater sense of urgency this time. And I also started doing public health research into police violence in 2014 and can say we've just seen very little change. About 1,200 people were killed each year by police in various sorts of circumstances, but many preventable. And the reforms since 2014 have been very minor, body cams or implicit bias training. And I think there's a growing sense that something more profound needs to be done, and protests need to be at a higher level and pushing for more fundamental change.
And tell us about your research, when you started it, and what you were looking at then, and sort of how it's changed over the past few years.
So I've looked at several different issues. One of them is just trying to get a sense of how many people police kill a year in the United States. There's no official comprehensive government data source on it. I found that the primary sources of data undercount police killings by half. And if you talk about situations like George Floyd, where someone is killed by police but wasn't shot, maybe it was a taser or a chokehold, other kind of restraint, those are particularly poorly counted. So that's one area, trying to improve reporting. Another is just looking at the level of racial inequality and economic inequality. People of all races in poorer neighborhoods are more likely to be killed by police. Of course, Black people are more likely to be killed by police than white people. And I also found that Black people are more likely to be killed by police even in white neighborhoods, especially in white neighborhoods. In fact, there may be a sense of police treating Black people differently in majority of white neighborhoods with greater suspicion.
And Keith, as a former member of the force, I wonder what your reaction is to what Justin is saying. I'm sure you've heard of this yourself, but what would you have to say?
I would say that his work is very important because it's shedding light on an area that really, frankly, is not served appropriately by academia. The questions that are asked really reflect the priorities of the individuals or the entities that are asking them. And if the question is not even being asked, then it's not even a consideration. And so the fact that he's doing work that's looking at how many individuals are involved in they're killed as a result of their interactions with police is important. And then looking at the circumstances as to how that may have happened. And from there, you can then have an idea of what needs to happen in order to stop unnecessary, inappropriate. And so we, get all these media reports, we get the videos across the nation of, physical altercations with police, but we have no context. And so for those who are oriented towards, looking at police as being beneficial, they see those as just isolated incidents. And for those who do not have faith or trust in their police departments, they look at it as just an overall strategy of suppressing communities. And so we have to have data, we have to have science involved, we have to have criminologists and epidemiologists, we have to have academia, scholarship really examine what is happening on the ground so that we can then develop strategies that are effective. We've got all kinds of oversight that police departments have, from federal consent decrees to attorney generals to civilian complaint review boards. But those are reactive. Those are not proactive. And in order to be proactive, you really have to have good scientific data to back up your beliefs.
So you would acknowledge that reform within the police departments across America needs to happen.
Right, but that reform has to be based on solid data to develop your best practices. Now, there are organizations that work hard to develop best practices: International Association of Chief of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the Council, the CALEA, which is a law enforcement academic organization. They all work, and they have for many years, on developing more professional police officers that do not exhibit the types of biases and assaultive behavior that is not conducive to good police-community relations. And make no mistake, the police cannot function without the support of the community, whichever community that they live in. They live in a poor community, if they live in a Black or brown community, they need the community support in order to function. Otherwise, it's a very dangerous society for all involved.
on the front lines, I've seen police consistently inciting violence. And I think it's one of the things, and it's one of the reasons why organizers like myself call out police departments on the systemic issues that exist within these departments across the country.
Police officers are human beings. They are capable of taking something personally. If someone yells at them or insults them, they are capable of reacting personally to those insults. They're supposed to have a thick skin. They're supposed to not react to prompts or provocations. And so, that I think speaks to some of what Lewis may have seen. However, I would steer clear. I'd be very cautious about secondhand information or anything that you haven't seen with your own eyes regarding what police have been told or the context with which they're operating, because the police have been managing demonstrations for many years, and they have rules of engagement. And one thing that struck me when you said that we don't have it's a leaderless demonstration. The police need to talk to the folks that are running the protests to determine what the rules of engagement are going to be. If there are going to be any arrests for civil disobedience, the police have to be able to manage the time, place, and manner of the demonstration. They are responsible not only for the safety of themselves, they're responsible for the safety of the public, they're responsible for the safety of the innocent bystanders, they're responsible for the safety of the demonstrators. Additionally, there are always going to be in demonstrations, different groups. Some of those groups are not demonstrators, they're not protesters, they are rioters, and they may represent things like anarchy. They may have other agendas which put the rest of the vast individuals who are simply exercising their right to protest an unjust governmental action. They're putting everyone at risk because of their lack of concern for their destruction of property and people. Everyone is being put into one category. And on the other side, we don't want police officers to be seen to be demonized, because many of them work very hard to develop good community relations. There are some that are not good, and those bad officers are, they should not be tolerated, and they usually are not tolerated by the good ones. So I just wanted to add more context to what the conversation is talking about.
And I guess just to the group, to responding to what you said, Keith, given all of this, how do you create trust then within the community and within law enforcement? How do we bridge, obviously, this disconnect that's happening?
What has always been key for good police community relations is talking and listening. The art of listening is extremely important. Understand each person's perspective, what the police have to do, and what the community is demanding. Being able to communicate, to have the ability to then work together to solve issues that are of great importance to all the stakeholders in the community. Also bring in the stakeholders, the business leaders, the agency heads that are dealing with the various types of criminal justice activities that each city is responsible for, because the courts need to be involved in the conversation for meaningful reform. The corrections, the healthcare system. There are many different aspects of this that touch the problem. And ultimately, I think what's most important to understand is that we have to call the issue what the issue is. And if it is discrimination against people or disparate treatment of people because of their ethnicity, then we're talking about white supremacy. It's a long legacy, a long history going back from slavery, slave codes, to Jim Crow, to segregation, up to this point. How we address that is going to be important for future generations. If we choose to ignore it, then, or not call it what it is, then it's going to continue to express itself and rear its ugly head in many different forms.
Luis, do you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think one, Keith, much respect to the work that you do and everything that you said, but I think I have to kindly disagree. I think the narrative that you're pushing is that there's some bad apples, which is what we usually hear from the departments across the country. I think I'll respond by saying what has been shared across social media all over. If we have 1,000 good cops and 10 bad cops, and those 1,000 good cops don't stand up to rectify what those bad cops are doing or call them out on their behavior, then we have 1,010 bad cops. I'd also say that I'm on the front lines and see what's going on. Again, I'd share at the protest I organized in from Foley Square to Manhattan DA Cy Vance's office. Police literally drove their motorcycles into the crowd, where they could have very easily injured someone. And so I think it's also important that we address why folks are even out on the streets. Folks are out not because of racial discrimination, not because of racial disparities. They're out because people are being murdered. I think consistently, from Eric Garner to George Floyd, Black people in this country cannot continue to sit back and sit by while we're being murdered at the hands of police. As a young person who continues to see this and full display on social media, enough is enough. As an organizer who does this, not only when it's popular, not only when it's mainstream, I recognize how important it is that folks show up, even if the spaces are decentralized. You noted a really important piece around having leaders in spaces, and I like to say that for myself, I literally have to stand in between the line that the police decided to form and some protesters to keep the peace. I'd also say that, to your point, there are white folks showing up to these spaces who are trying to antagonize. And so there was some of that needed to be controlled as well. But I think when police show up in a presence, in like visibly wanting to demean or come after protesters who are peaceful on the streets, that's a huge problem, and I think that needs to be addressed before we continue the discussion around what police accountability, transparency, and addressing disparities looks like in this country.
And Justin, I want to bring you in as well, because when we talk about meaningful reform, one of the things that you argue is that reform also needs to happen within the medical examiner's office and the coroner's office in order to hold police accountable. Can you talk to us about what it is that you believe?
Often what happens is, in cases like George Floyd's, the coroner or medical examiner will downplay the role of police. So we saw in the initial medical examiner report that there was a finding of no asphyxiation, perhaps drugs were involved, passive voice was used in this report, and just somehow George Floyd died. It was later revised to a finding of homicide. But in many instances, because of the close working relationship with police, because of this sort of pseudo-medical diagnosis called excited delirium, where they blame deaths on this not medically recognized diagnosis involving drugs when people in custody stop breathing. And in some jurisdictions, you have cases where police withhold evidence from the death investigators. So we need to see more independence and between medical examiners and police to allow these reports, which are important pieces of evidence, to be more unbiased and accurate.
Keith, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the examination should not stop at just what the police are doing. It should look at all the components of the criminal justice system and address the inequities wherever they may lay. You're not going to see a problem if you don't know that it's a problem.
We're calling for the city here in New York, as well as the governor of Los Angeles, the governor of California, and the mayor of Los Angeles, and other elected officials across the country, to continue to defund the police and fund summer youth employment programs, things like CUNY ASAP here in the city, which provides accelerated associate programs for students, fund K-12 education. Right now in the city, we've seen a complete cut to summer youth employment programs, as well as a complete gash into the Department of Education, while little to none cuts to the New York Police Department. And
in public health, I think we're asking police to do a lot of things that the field of public health would be better served to do. Police are involved in managing drug use. We can decriminalize drugs and treat it as a public health problem. They've done it in Portugal with good results. We even have very effective public health models of dealing with interpersonal violence, such as a cure violence model that comes out of Chicago. So I'd say, yes, take away the military gear, the overfunding of police departments, and invest in other solutions that support safety and health.
So we're going to leave it there. I really want to thank the three of you for being with us today. I think this was really interesting to hear all of your perspectives, and especially given you're all in different fields. And I feel like we all walked away a little bit smarter and hopefully thinking a little bit more forward about what comes next. So just want to thank our guests, Keith Taylor, Luis Hernandez, and Justin Feldman. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.